and would you go ahead, Ms. Ray, and please call the City Council roll.
The Honorable Mayor Mario Avery.
Present.
The Honorable Mayor Pro Tem Linda J. Davis.
Present.
The Honorable Alex Heath.
Present.
The Honorable Hattie Portis Jones.
Present.
The Honorable Pat Palland.
Present.
The Honorable Ulysses J. Smallwood.
Present.
And the Honorable James Whitmore.
Present.
Mayor, you have a quorum. Also, Attorney Starkey is running a few minutes late. He'll be here in a few minutes.
Okay, no problem. At this time, we'll go ahead and go to our first agenda. Mr. City Administrator, you want to mention it?
Oh, my goodness.
Thank you very much, Mayor. We are excited and pleased to have with us a representative from Fulton County District Attorney's Office that's going to give us a presentation in reference to Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So I'd invite her to come forward at this time and share with us her information.
How you doing?
Good afternoon,
Yes, ma'am. How you
and
doing?
thank you for
Good
the
afternoon.
invite. I am Yolanda Mack. I am the deputy of the Sex Crimes Unit in the Fulton County DA's office. I bring you greetings from DA Fonnie T. Willis. The Sexual Assault Unit in Fulton County was started by DA Willis in her first term. She thought that this issue was so important that she would create a unit to only deal with cases of adult sexual assault. So I thank you that you have invited us here, and I have a very short presentation. Many people don't know that April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And in this month, we bring awareness to sexual assault, sexual violence, and we try to educate the community on what it is and what, if anything, we can do to help prevent it. I think it's working. Okay, now it's working. Thank you. Okay. So what is the purpose? This is an annual campaign to raise public awareness about sexual assault and educate communities and individuals on how to prevent sexual violence. What is the legal definition of sexual abuse? What is the criteria for sexual assault? I've had some people ask me, well, is there a difference between sexual abuse and sexual assault? No, they're used interchangeably. It is the same. Sexual assault happens when someone touches another person in a sexual manner without their consent, or when someone makes another person take part in sexual activity with them without that person's consent. It includes unwanted kissing and sexual touching. Parameters of sexual assault. It is a crime for someone with a supervisory or disciplinary authority over another to have sexual contact with them. Sexual assault can occur between any gender. The law prohibits any unconsented to sexual activity with or without force. And we put with or without force because there are some crimes that require force. When you have an adult rape case, that requires some type of force or intimidation. But there are some crimes like sexual battery that just requires no consent. There is no force element to that. I added this slide, things you should know, because as I prepared this PowerPoint, I realized there were some things that I've been doing this over 20 years. I'm the deputy over the Sex Crimes Unit here in Fulton, but I was previous to that the deputy of the Sex Crimes and Domestic Violence Unit in DeKalb. So some of these things are common knowledge to me, and I realized they weren't to others. So a person can consent to some acts, but not to all acts. So one of the things that we see in a lot of our cases, and that's why I think education is important, especially with the young people, starting to reprogram and getting them to understand. Because just because someone consents to one particular act does not mean they have consented to all of the acts that you may want to perform. And so a lot of times the other person will say, but she said yes. And she will say, well, I said yes to this. But when he went on to some other things, I said no to those. And so I think it's important for people to know consent is not perpetual, and that at any point someone can say, I agree to one thing, but I don't agree to something else. A person can change his or her mind at any time. And I used his or her because we know men are also victims of sexual assault as well. I think that's important because I think sometimes people think, well, she agreed, she said that's what she wanted to do, he agreed, he said that's what he wanted to do. But at some point, that person may say, you know, I changed my mind about it. I felt good about it 5 minutes ago, not so much now. And I think it's important that we see a lot of cases where they don't realize at any point someone says, you know what, this is not something that I want to do. That consent can be withdrawn. And the third, I said, be mindful when alcohol is involved when it comes to consent. What we see is a lot of the college cases, because we know that's the age, you know, they're having a good time and they're drinking, but those cases get so convoluted. So convoluted, and I told D.A. Willis I think we should do a lot of training like in the colleges. For example, I know that men and boys are taught chivalry, you know, if she's drinking, you know, walk her to a room, don't do it. Give her to her girlfriend. Tell her girlfriends to take her, because sometimes when they get in the room, now we have these different stories of what kind of happens in there, and we're trying to parse it out. The chief of police at Morehouse is calling me saying, hey, you know, what do you think? And it is a difficult job to do. So I think there's a lot of education that needs to come in the colleges, just to kind of talk to them about, you know, drinking responsibly. We know they probably will drink, but just responsibly. Okay, and so I thought I would put some statistics in here so people can kind of understand what we're dealing with here. And so the most recent statistics were from 2018. 734,630 people were either raped, attempted, or threatened to be raped in the United States. 1 in 5 women experienced a completed or attempted rape. 24.8% of men experience some type of sexual violence. 1 in 3 female victims experience sexual assault between the ages of 11 and 17. 1 in 4 male victims experience sexual assault between the ages of 11 and 17. Approximately 50% of the sexual assaults are by intimate partners or acquaintances. The estimated lifetime cost of rape is $122,461 per victim. So what does it look like? Some of the obvious things: bruises or bleeding near sensitive or genital areas of the body, torn, stained, or bloody clothing. These are maybe some things you can look for if you believe someone has been sexually assaulted, or things that may alert you if you see them. Unexplained sexually transmitted diseases. We see that sometimes in children. If they go to the doctor and they have an STD, they more than likely did not get it from the toilet seat. That's a common thing. It is usually from sexual contact. 99.9% of the time, sexual contact, rarely from the toilet seat. Becoming upset when bathed, changed, or examined. We see that sometimes in elder and also in children. So a lot of these things you can do when you have caretakers for not only young children, but the elder population as well. A change in behavior. We see that a lot of times when the kids are acting out in school. A lot of times people are like, oh, they're just out of control and they're bad, and perhaps, but a lot of times when they dig deeper, when they get into counseling, when they find a confidant, you will learn sometimes that someone is sexually abusing them in the home. Perhaps they have disclosed and they weren't believed, or the person is still around, and so they are just acting out. Self-report of sexual abuse. One thing I want to mention, victims and survivors, a lot of times we have delayed disclosures. People determine at whatever time they feel comfortable coming forward. I think one thing that's important is for survivors and victims to know that even if you're not ready to disclose, you can go to Grady, you can go to the hospital. If you're an adult, they're not mandatory to report it like with kids. If it's a child, they're going to report. But as an adult, you can still be examined. They can still collect evidence, and they will save those things for you for a period of time. So if you decide that you want to come forward, it would make it easier for the DA's office to prosecute and move forward because there has been perhaps some evidence that has been secured by Grady. I tell people outcry to a trusted person. Sometimes adults, even kids, sometimes they're not ready to tell, they're not ready to face it. And sometimes when they come forward, we're trying to figure out what evidence, what proof do we have, because at some point that's just an allegation. So one thing that's important, sometimes to outcry to a trusted person. So even though you didn't go to law enforcement, you may have some friends or family member who says, no, I remember that, she did tell me about it. Sometimes I say journaling. Sometimes we've had victims who have kept journals for years, who have just documented things that occurred to them. And then the last I have is grooming. Grooming is sometimes you see pretty much all the time with children. And so I tell people with children, communicate with them and just watch their behaviors. Grooming is a process that an abuser does. They usually don't start off with a sexual act. They usually start off with something that can be borderline and if questioned can easily be explained. And so, for example, I had a case where it was the stepdad, and the little girl was 4 or 5 years old when it started. Of course, she did not recognize what it was because what he would have her to do is change into her T-shirt and underwear and come in and out of the room in different T-shirt and underwear. And she said the last time she came in, he was unclothed. She did not disclose that at that time. Of course, she did not disclose until it escalated into touching. But that's something that if she had told, they like to test. Grooming is like testing. Let's see if she'll tell that. And he could easily say, oh, her T-shirt, the one she put on was dirty, or that one was torn. So as an adult, you think, oh, okay, it makes sense. So grooming is a lot of times a process they use before they actually start to sexually assault the victim. Strangers. I always tell people as far as victims, just things to be aware of. Always be aware of your surroundings. If possible, travel in pairs. If it's late or getting dark, avoid talking to strangers or panhandlers. Stay in a well-lit area. Trust your gut. If it doesn't seem right, just abort that. Ask for help. Don't open the door for anyone who isn't a family member or a friend. That's important. A lot of times people who prey on the elderly, people who are home during the daytime, sometimes kids, they open the door for someone, and then once they're inside, they assault them. Always don't be afraid to ask for help. There are so many people who are here in our community who's willing to help, and I will have a slide with resources that are available to us in this community. And of course, you can always call 911. So what can we do as a community? If you see something, say something. I tell kids, tell a parent, tell a teacher, a trusted adult, tell someone in law enforcement. Don't be afraid to use your voice. Don't be afraid that no one will believe you, because of course that's what the predators use a lot of times. Nobody's gonna believe you. Why would they believe you? Your mom is not gonna believe you. And sometimes that is in a child's mind. No one's going to believe them. Trust your gut, ask for help, because sometimes you hear people say, I didn't think that was right, or I felt like it wasn't right, but I wasn't sure before it escalates. So we tell them just trust. If it doesn't feel right to you, just say something, and if it's not anything, then it's not anything. But at least you've confided in an adult, you've confided in someone. And here I have some resources here. The Rape Crisis Center across Georgia, the DeKalb Resource Center, Grady Rape Crisis Center. There are some for males, the resource centers for male survivors, some for military, the Department of Defense community, and the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. Thank you.
Members of council, anyone has, actually I was going to let Mr. Whitmore start, because in this case he had a role as it relates to them coming here. So go ahead, Mr. Whitmore. Then I'll come to you, Mr. Whitmore.
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, Ms. Mack, I would like to say thank you for coming in and sharing this information. Even though Chambers is empty, this is being viewed live via the Fairburns Facebook page. So the information will be there, and plus people come after the fact and they review everything. But I just wanted to personally thank you because, well, actually, ma'am, will you come up to the podium as well, please? I just want mayor and council to know that when Ms. Tika, who is a Fairburnite that lives on Waterboy, actually called and asked if the city would be interested, I immediately called the city administrator, and he just opened up his arms and said, yes, that's something that we definitely would like to do here in the city of Fairburn. And then he turned it over to staff, and they showed up on Friday for our third Friday, first event, summer series, and had a tent and a lot of information. And also, Ms. Mack, you had an opportunity to speak. And I just want to thank you because, you know, I wasn't aware that it's 24.8% of men that are assaulted, you know, and everybody think it's just always a woman, but, you know, and then, of course, the 1 in 5 women experiences it well. So I think it's good information. It's information that needs to stay before the forefront. And I would ask that you stay in communication with our staff city administrator, and let's do it again next year.
Yes, we will.
Every year when you're doing this, let's make it happen so we can keep it in the forefront of everyone.
Thank
And
you.
I just want to say thank you. And Ms. Tika, do you have anything to say to mayor and council?
No, not really. I would like to thank you, Councilman Whitmore, for, you know, making all of this happen, and for Mr. Phillips, for just you all being so welcoming with this topic, inviting us so that we can put this information out to the community, because we do see a lot of these crimes, and, you know, a lot of the victims, some of this information probably would have helped them ahead of their assault. So I just want to thank you for allowing us to present for you all. And like you said, let's do it again next year.
Mr. Smallwood, go ahead, sir.
All right, so I have a question. I don't want to put you in court with a tough question, but I have a son as well as I have 2 daughters. I'm 52, and I still talk with a lot of people in this time, so it's more of an informative question I asked, because on your slide it said that consent can change at any time. Talk to me about consent that's way beyond the moment when, okay, maybe a year from now or 2 years from now, you say, okay, well, I don't think I wanted to do that at that time. But that person that, and those people that did that at that moment, they were under an understanding. And so that's, I think, what I'm confused about in culture right now. So I'm just trying to get an understanding. Since you're here, thank you for coming.
It's a good
as well.
question. It's a good question.
That's a
'cause
tough one, because I'm
is.
seeing a lot of that right now. So I'm kind of wondering, and I'm sensitive to all sides, like I said, because I see all sides in my own family.
No,
Kid.
absolutely.
Yeah, so
No,
how does that
absolutely.
work?
It's interesting because I have a son and a daughter too.
Yes.
And so that's what makes it tough. You know, people think as a prosecutor, oh, you're only looking at one side. But if you're doing the job right,
Yeah.
it is tough because you realize you have somebody on the other side too. And whatever decision you make can be life-changing for both sides. And so the job is really tough. But one of the things I usually say in this presentation is regret is not rape, right? Okay. So what you're describing is a year later you thought about it, you know, and said, hey, I don't think I really wanted to do that. Even if it's the next day, that's not the same.
Right. Okay.
When I'm speaking of a lot of cases that we see is that I'll just say the woman in this example may consent to sex. She may consent to sex, but then he wants to do some other things.
Yeah.
And then she makes it clear, I don't want to do that.
Right.
I only signed up for this, and then he
Yes.
still forces her, as she's saying, no, I don't want to do that, to do other things.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I say consent to some things, it's not consent to others. I think some people take it as, well, she said she wanted to. I'm like, well, I think she said she wanted
Right.
to do that. And then she started to say, I'm opposed. And one thing I tell victims, too, and survivors, I'm like, you have to use your voice. okay?
Yeah.
Because rape requires against your will and force, okay? And so we have cases sometimes where, and these are acquaintance date situations, because if someone snatches you off the street, we're already in force, even if you don't do anything else, right? But in a date acquaintance situation, if someone says, I just didn't say anything, I just didn't do anything, he knew I didn't want to because we talked about it on the phone, I'm like, but that's not rape, right? Because you have to convey to the person at the time, I don't want to do this.
Right.
No, stop. Or in your physical body language, he's pushing me, I'm pushing back.
Right.
So I also tell people, rape is not saying nothing and then coming in the next day saying he knew I didn't want to. It has to be
Okay.
conveyed to the person at the time. I'm not okay with this in some form.
Yes.
So in your example where you just say a year later, oh, I shouldn't have done that, alcohol.
Yeah.
There's being incapacitated to consent, right? So that's when somebody's passed out. Everyone says they're passed out, and they're still passed out when someone walks in, you're assaulting them. But then there's bad decisions when you're drinking, okay? So that's different, So you've made some bad decisions while you were drinking maybe you would not have made if you had not been drinking. But that's not sexual assault either.
Okay. And one more, can I get
Go
one
ahead,
more?
you still got, sir, go ahead.
And, because I'm an educator, because we used to see it at the school too. Out of that 731,000, I think you showed up there, how much of this is you seeing? Because like you said, it's somebody trusted with that family thing. You see, is it most of the family?
A lot.
Yeah.
With the children,
That's the
a
ones
lot.
I was talking about, yeah.
a lot. A lot. And that's what kind of delays the disclosure.
Yeah.
I think it's always easy when it's it's easier when it's that stranger, that one-time person that no one knew, but it's usually a family member or someone you're allowing to stay in the home, someone you're trusting with your children. And then I remember there was one case, the little girl said, well, she knew it was wrong, right? But then she was like, but he was like her dad, and he was very good to her in other ways and other things, and he taught her to fight and do all these different things. So she knew if she said something, he would no longer be there as that father figure. So you have a lot of things that come into play. But a lot of times it's someone who you've trusted your children with for some reason. Babysitter,
Thank
mom's
you, and
boyfriend.
bless you all for all you all do, because it's a tough thing y'all doing, yeah.
Yes. There are situations where someone is violated, raped, or what have you, some of the situations that you've outlined. And when it occurs, they either feel like I was stupid, or I'm not going to share this with anybody because it'll make me look bad. So I'm just going to let it go and move on forward. But maybe 5, 10, 15 years later in their life, there are different behavior or repercussions that come up. And when they do have an opportunity to talk to a therapist or whatever, and you dig real deep down as to what has occurred in their life, that maybe that has caused these behaviors or whatever, how can we, or how can you train, teach, share with our young women, young men, you know, that it's not your fault? You know what I'm saying? So they can feel empowered to do something in the beginning, as opposed to letting that situation fester, and they don't even realize that it's festering until later on.
Till later on. And I think that's where the education comes in, really in the schools, just kind of educating them in general, empowering the kids to say, use your voice, it's okay, tell someone.
Yeah.
You know, someone will believe you. You know, all of these things that you're thinking, we see it a lot of times with adults, you know, if I had not gone over there, right? And so they deal with that for a little while, if I had not.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a natural thing in some situations to feel that, but I think the education comes in people realizing that, you know, it's not their fault.
Right.
And that if they would just tell someone and even just start the process of healing and counseling early on, you know, they would be better off later on.
Right. Well, we appreciate what you do. This is really needed in our society now. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Any other member of council have a comment? No. Okay, I just want to mention publicly that this is a very, very important subject matter. The timing couldn't probably be better. I'm actually part of a ministry at my church where changes were. It's called Marriage in the Spotlight. Yeah. And literally, I want to say last November, in the midst of these people from all over the country on this call. And it's totally, no one knows anybody's identification. And a lady called in and just been a victim of that at home. And of course, we led her to, in this case, the appropriate, we asked her to get off the phone, we gave her information, and this is just that real. So again, would you put that slide back up there? The
Resources?
The resources, I just want to make sure for folks that can see that would ultimately end up on social media. Just want to make sure the people in our city that are victims of this understand that it'll be in that, be nobody know who's asking about it, but I want to make sure, is it possible to get back to that slide?
You know, it's interesting you say that because a lot of times when we see that playing out is during jury selection. It takes so much longer to pick juries in sex crime cases because they're, the obvious, well, people hear charges, right, and they're like, whoa, But there are so many people that break down crying even during jury selection who say, to be quite honest with you, I never told anyone about this. This was 20-something years ago. I thought I was over it, but just hearing you guys mention these charges, just mention what this case is about, brought all of these things, back to me. And a lot of times they say, honestly, I just don't think I'm even the right person to sit on this jury. And sometimes they'll apologize and say, I know it's my duty, but I honestly just didn't think it would have affected me hearing this. Yeah. And you hear a lot of men and stuff on the jury, anyone been sexually assaulted, they talk about their wives and their girlfriends who they may not have known at the time, but who have confided in them what occurred. And I always ask the follow-up question, was the person brought to justice? Was it ever reported? And most of the time they say, no. They never reported it. She never told anyone, but she did confide in me later that this was something that happened to her.
And I'm sure you get a lot of shame then with the guys too, because I'm a mentor and I know that reporting that for a man is very kind of shameful, so I mean, is that something you see a lot with the shame with the man, admitting that something happened to them?
I think you see it with the men. I think you see it with the women too, just depending on the situation. You definitely see it with the men. I think I've seen cases where it takes people a while. Sometimes they're confused because sometimes their body perhaps maybe reacts to it. And so they think, well, maybe I did like it. Right. Maybe I did want it. So then there's some shame and confusion on whether this truly was a violation, because I said their body kind of defies them. And so then they have to start thinking, maybe I liked it, And so I think you have a lot of that as well.
And so your contact information, I'm just trying to make sure, I see the information up there. I'm just trying to make sure anyone that's watching right now understands that will take you straight to your organization. And I just want to make sure the resources there, because again, very familiar, and unfortunately even Joyce Myers, a well-known pastor nationwide, has actually talked about her, in this case, her being victimized in this area. So thank you so much. Is any member?
Yes, I have a question as well. As I was listening to the conversation, I was thinking about the city of Fairburn and our police department. I don't recall us ever having any rape cases, when we would get statistics and all. But my question to you is regarding resources and training for police departments. And we're really getting into community policing and to what degree we can share information or have discussions about this or refer or whatever in that regard. I believe this would be a great resource for our police officers. And our police chief is in the rear there. So if you can just talk a little bit about what resources or training you provide police departments,
Well-
and what things we can take advantage of.
Well, what I can tell you is that the DA's office is always, we think it starts a lot of times with the police, because they're the first line, right? They're the first one who makes contact. And so a lot of the police departments will reach out to us, ask us to come in, you know, and say, hey, can you come in and just talk to our sex crimes? We're always open to doing that, because I think if we work together, you know, they will be a little more educated on what to look for, things to do, and then it will make the cases better because they've done some things on the front end. So any police department who wants to partner with us, I know we go into APD and Sandy Springs and various places, you know, where they say, we want you guys to come in. Sometimes we do cases, they'll call me and say, hey, I just want to run this case by you. What else can I do? You know, what have I not done? You know, some of the tougher ones, and our door's always open to say, okay, come on in, let's talk about it. So we'd be glad to do that for Fairburn as well.
Well, that would be fantastic. And I'm thinking more about prevention. So the more educated and trained our officers are in identification and discussion and knowing where to refer, that hopefully that will help in preventing or at least minimizing the degree of these cases. So I saw the police chief making note. So Chief, if you would make contact with Ms. Mack, and so that would be fantastic. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Mr. Smallwood, you still have some?
No.
Oh, I'm good, I'm good. With that being, I'm sorry, Mr.
Just very briefly,
Okay.
one, thank you for being here, Ms. Mack. We really appreciate it. And thank you for what I can only imagine is incredibly difficult work. So thank you for that. But not unlike Councilman Smallwood, I also am a parent of college-age children, son and a daughter. And I know you mentioned the possibility of a targeted effort towards college campuses when kids are drinking. And that point that Councilman Smallwood asked about consent is not to one thing, is not consent to everything. The average 19 or 20-year-old has no clue. And that's life-changing information, so that you know at any moment the person says no,
Right.
beyond that is a crime. And I just imagine there are a lot of young men and young women who don't know that and think that consent initially is consent continually, and that's not the law.
That's correct, and I think that's why we do participate in the, I think it's the Coordinated Community Response Team. We go out to Spelman, like they're having something Wednesday. It's a tabling event. We have cards and we pass out information with some of the things that's on the PowerPoint. It's really just education, because what happens is you have a young lady who's upset, her parents are calling and says, hey, my daughter, you know, said no, which is fear, and then you have the young man who's like, but she said yes, and
Right.
it's such a hard job, right? You know, trying to figure out, you know, who said what at what time, you know. So I think it's the education, and then really starting to be reprogrammed early with boundaries. If you think it's not okay, go on. If you think she's had too many drinks, just don't even worry about it. Not that she's incapacitated, but just being willing to just say, you know what?
Expose yourself.
Okay. You know, if she seems reserved about it, because we get those calls, you know, where she's like, well, he knew, and that, I'm like, yeah, you know, and, you know, now we're trying to filter through, you know, she seems reserved, don't even worry about it, just say you don't seem like you're interested in it. And so just kind of teaching them that just really early so they can be programmed to be quicker, you know, to just walk away versus moving
If the
forward.
city can be a partner in that effort at any time, please let us know. We have a college campus here in the city, and so maybe there's an opportunity that we can add some value when that opportunity presents itself.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Right, thank you.
Thank you.
Members of council, we only had one agenda item. We'll start at 7 o'clock sharp.